favorite book or story? What is it about that story that stands out to you? What makes you enjoy it so much? Is it the exceptional quality of the plot? Is it the twists and turns of the tale? Is it the satisfying ending? What about the characters? Think about it for a minute. What would the epic tale, Lord of the Rings, be without the loyal and courageous Samwise Gamgee? Imagine Harry Potter without the wise and quirky Albus Dumbledore. What is To Kill a Mockingbird without the inquisitive and spunky Scout Finch? Although it may be the plot of a story that draws us in and urges us to keep reading, but the best plot is useless without good characters to live it out. You may enjoy a plot, but you will identify with a person. In her thrilling story, Jane Eyre, Charlotte Bronte presents us with a person. This book, modestly described by the author as, quote, a plain tale with few pretensions, end quote, takes place in 19th century England and tells the tale of orphan Jane Eyre's attempts to make a life for herself amidst people and circumstances decidedly set against her. Jane Eyre is a person of contrasts. The person she is inside rarely coincides with the outside Jane Eyre. Today, I want to explore the character Jane Eyre by taking a look at three of these contrasts. The first, Jane's outer weakness versus her inner strength. Number two, Jane's inferior situation versus her superior character. And third, her plain exterior versus her lovely interior. First, we'll take a look at Jane's outer weaknesses and her inner strength. Jane Eyre was a fairly delicate person. She suffered from poor health both as a child and as an adult. The hardships of a childhood spent in a dreary and abusive school did little to improve this. By the time she was employed as a governess to the ward of a certain Mr. Rochester, she's not very strong and is easily affected by physical and mental strain. However, this outside frailty is inconsistent with Jane's inner strength. Love springs up between Jane and her employer, Mr. Rochester. When their hopes for marriage are dashed, Mr. Rochester urges her to elope with him anyway. Knowing that such a decision is morally wrong and would be destructive to them both, Jane walks away from the situation. She refuses him and leaves. She loves Mr. Rochester very much, and this decision almost breaks her, but her inner strength prevails, and she takes the initiative by walking away. After such a difficult trial, many people would understandably struggle to go on, and Jane does find it hard, but she perseveres and recovers from an illness brought on by the strain and strives to forge a new life for herself. I don't really want to spoil the ending here, so I won't go on, but you get my point. Next, I want to address the differences between Jane's inferior situation and her superior character. Jane was born to poor parents who both died when she was a baby. She grew up dependent on the charity of her aunt and was often reminded of her unfortunate position by her aunt and her cousins. At the age of 10, she was sent to a school for underprivileged children such as herself. After graduating, she spent 2 years as a teacher and then went on to be a governess, a job that was lowly and lonely and difficult in this day and age. Despite her low social position and the low expectations for someone with her place in society, Jane Eyre proved to be a noble character who was clearly above her circumstances. Jane was both loyal and self-sacrificing. More than once, she denies herself personal happiness for the sake of the good and happiness of Mr. Rochester. This loyalty extends to her family as well. When Jane comes into an inheritance, inherits a large sum of money, she shares this money with her poorer cousins, taking a smaller share for herself so that her family can share in the benefits. Jane is also a woman of integrity. When she and Mr. Rochester are unable to get married, it is Jane who protects them both by walking away. In Jane's own words, quote, "Laws and principles are not for times when there is not temptation. They are for such moments as this, when body and soul rise in mutiny against their rigor," end quote. And again, quote, "If at my individual convenience I might break them, what would be their worth?" End quote. In this we can see that Jane does the right thing, even when it's very difficult for her to do. Finally, let's examine the way that Jane's plain exterior contrasts with her lovely interior. Throughout the novel, Charlotte Bronte informs the reader that Jane is not necessarily a physically attractive person. Much of this is due to the way that Jane, the narrator, views herself, but the remarks of other characters often coincide with her opinions in this area. Jane describes herself as a, quote, "plain Quakerish governess," end quote. One of the servants who knew her in childhood admits that she was never a beauty, while the other goes so far as to call her a toad. But once again, the outside Jane is very different from the inside Jane. Her honesty, loyalty, kindness, diligence, wholehearted love, and strong sense of right and wrong are all manifestations of her beautiful soul. Her beauty is of another kind, a better kind. As Jane grows up and matures, people close to her who are able to observe this kind of beauty are strongly attracted to her. Even her employer, the proud, jaded, discontent Mr. Rochester, is drawn to her and falls in love with her. Bronte demonstrates the contrast surrounding her character, Jane Eyre, again and again throughout the novel. Jane's outer weakness is contrasted with her inner strength. Her inferior situation greatly differs from her superior character. Finally, her plain exterior belies her lovely interior. There's a common saying that you should never judge by outward appearances. Often, these outward appearances are just the tip of the iceberg. As I mentioned before, in her preface, Charlotte Bronte, the author, described her novel as simply, quote, "a plain tale with no pretensions," end quote. Yet when you look deeper, it's so much more. Jane Eyre is a deep and beautiful and enduring story with a heroine who herself is sort of like an iceberg, in that there's a lot more to Jane than what meets the eye. The fact that Bronte chose to title her book after her main character is proof that even the most thrilling plot can never be separated from the characters that live it out.